Ja, willkommen zu einer neuen Ausgabe von DocFest München at Home. Heute geht es um den Film #Unfit, The Psychology of Donald Trump. Und es ist ein sehr interessanter Film, der sozusagen versucht, den Präsidenten der USA auf seine Tauglichkeit für das Amt zu untersuchen, ganz wissenschaftlich teilweise. Und der Mann, der den gedreht hat, den schalten wir jetzt zu. Er ist natürlich wählbar für den Kino-Publikumspreis, wie immer vom Bayerischen Rundfunk und von Dreisat. Wenn Sie diesen Film toll finden, geben Sie ihm Ihre Stimme für den Publikumspreis. Aber jetzt hören wir und sehen wir gleich Dan Partland, den Regisseur. Hi, welcome, Dan.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's nice you're in Los Angeles, in sunny Los Angeles right now.
Sunny and warm. It's a beautiful day in May. All inside.
Okay, enjoy, but you're still in quarantine like anybody else. Quarantine, yes.
It's a very pleasant environment to be quarantined in, but we're waiting here in Los Angeles, just like everyone, to try to get through the process.
Okay, let's talk about the film. I looked at your website, and that said that #Unfit is not politically motivated movie. Is it really true that it's not politically motivated, what you did?
Well, it's about politics. There's no question about that. But what we're trying to say is that this isn't an analysis of policy goals or different party perspectives. It's an effort to get away from the news cycle. The news cycle, I think, has really struggled to cover this president and to understand him, because it swings widely from one outrageous news story to the next. And each one has a different flavor and a different issue set, but there is something that's similar about each one. And the similar thread that runs through all of them is the underlying psychology of Trump himself. That is the question, and I think that's been very hard for news media to talk about. I think it's hard for the public to talk about. We don't necessarily have the language for speaking about psychology within political debate. It's not appropriate for lay people all the time to make those kind of judgments. And so what we tried to do was remove the right and left political divide, just talk about underlying characteristics of Trump's psychology and how that's affecting both policy, its agenda, but also the culture at large.
You say he's a sick man in a way.
Yeah, it's a provocative statement, but I think it's really true. I mean, I think mental health is one of the next big arenas for public discourse in America and in most of the industrialized world that has the bandwidth for beginning to understand mental health as not just public health crisis, but having a more nuanced discussion. Not that many years ago, people who had mental health diagnoses were cast aside as crazy. Some of them were institutionalized. I think the more the field of mental health has matured, the more nuanced the conversation has become. So yes, to say that Trump is a sick man, that's almost a dated way of talking about it. He has certain psychopathologies, and those psychopathologies create his behavior. And on some level, he's responsible for them, but on some level, he's not. And I think when you look at psychopathologies, it's important to distinguish between psychopathology that is a struggle for each and every one of us. Most of us have some kind of diagnosis or some way that we wrestle with our own psychology. But to distinguish those between dangerous pathologies. The issue is danger. It's not whether you have a diagnosis. All kinds of people have a diagnosis that doesn't make them unfit or unqualified for any number of jobs. It's very important that we're able to speak about that and not stigmatize very undangerous pathologies like depression and anxiety and so on.
Mhm.
Trump's particular cocktail of psychopathologies really conspire to make him very dangerous as a head of state or in any position of power.
Yeah, and especially with the youth of atomic power and atomic weapons and stuff like that. Yeah, that's what you show.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because the debate about the nuclear arsenal was so front and center when I was growing up, right? It was front and center as an issue, and starting, of course, in the 60s and 70s when the weapons themselves were developed. But by the 80s, we were really worried about the issue of nuclear annihilation, the Cold War at its height.
Ronald Reagan time, yeah.
During Reagan.
Yeah.
And every child growing up in certainly in American schools was really indoctrinated with the fear, the danger of nuclear annihilation, that the planet could just self-destruct, that this concept of deterrent through mutual self-destruction was a barbaric thing, and steps were put in place to try to minimize that. And ultimately, the Cold War subsiding is what really diminished that threat. But there's a lot of those safeguards are beginning to be undermined, really because we have not been vigilant about maintaining them. And it's happening at the same time when there are serious divides happening in the geopolitical environment that are putting superpowers at odds with each other. So the idea that some of the checks are being undermined to a system that was never sufficiently checked anyway is very threatening. Add to that a president who has shown a lot of very serious mental and emotional instabilities. And by that, I don't mean that he isn't capable of carrying on a reasonable conversation with people. The question is just about what seems to be a pathological inability to put the needs of the general public above his personal need. Mm. And so, at the time that we made the film, the nuclear threat seemed to be the very largest, most dangerous thing that could happen. We didn't know that there was a global pandemic coming. And global pandemic is, in a sense, the rollout of this fear, of that in a moment of extreme crisis to the general public in the United States and around the world, one of the key leaders who could really be putting the country and the world on a better footing, could be guiding a response, is pathologically unable to put the needs of all the people of the world ahead of his own personal need, which at the moment is his reelection. And so when you see his response, it is universally directed at his own need, in this case, reelection. He's willing to say anything and do anything and cast this crisis strictly in whatever terms are most favorable to him. And this is the, in a sense, the prophecy that the film was talking about has come to life.
But doesn't any politician do that all the time, to use any crisis for their own sake, to get reelected, to get more votes, to be more popular and stuff?
Sure. I mean, there is a measure of this that is built in as an inherent flaw to a democratic process, no question, which is that we elect people to serve us, and their first goal is to get elected. They say and do the things that they feel they need to do to get elected. I think that the difference is one of degree, and that's why we speak about it in terms of pathology. When you have a leader, a common leader, they may have an overdeveloped sense of ego. They may be a little bit narcissistic, used in a generic way. And they may be brutal advocates for their own interest. But they're able to see a larger picture. They are able to suspend their own interest and do something for the greater good when the moment calls upon it. What indicates there's a real pathology at work is that there is an inability to do that regardless of the circumstance. So in a sense, the whole argument of the film can be dismissed as aren't all politicians just like this. But again, back to what we were saying about having a more nuanced conversation about what mental health is. Yeah, all politicians are well versed at looking out for their own best interest, but they are not all pathologically incapable of acting in the interest of the general public. And if you have someone whose principal job is to serve the general public, this is a fatal flaw for a leader.
Yeah. That's true. And the lack of empathy, for instance, which is mentioned in the film.
Empathy is a normal human trait, and it's been important. There's all kinds of interesting evolutionary discussion about why it's important. Humans are collaborative species. They need to understand each other. They need to empathize and feel for each other to work together. Trump has shown repeatedly that he is so lacking in this essential emotional response that just honestly renders him incapable of making the kind of judgments that we need a leader to make.
Mm-hmm. Well, but what do you say? You know, the whole discussion over here, we always surprised that the guy like Donald Trump could become president at all. And over here in Europe, we were shocked in a way, but you have him now for like nearly 4 years, and the discussion is like there's it's just for or against Donald Trump. You can't be in between. You have, and this movie is just the Trump supporters would say this movie is just another pamphlet of the people who hate him. And isn't it just like you are preaching to the converted in a way? Because do you try to reach the supporters of Trump as well with this movie?
Number of really important points that you raised there, and I'll try to take them in reverse order. I think the first question about whether the movie preaches to the converted, I think there are people who will see it that way and will level that kind of criticism. And if that's the case, I'm okay with it. I think that wasn't the goal. The goal was to inform the public, knowing that the politics in the US and in many parts of the world are very, very polarized. It's very unlikely that a message like this would reach people who are inclined towards supporting Trump. But there are a number of people, there is a percentage who are on the fringe, who have a lot of questions about Donald Trump, who maybe voted for him despite not really being comfortable with him, but very much like the Republican policy agenda that they saw as coming with him. It's important for them to vote Republican. It wasn't so important for them to vote for Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. So that is a significant enough portion of the electorate in a very narrow, in a very tight race to be potentially meaningful to the outcome. But the film went out of its way to avoid interviewing partisans who were against Trump. We basically interviewed people of three categories: mental health professionals and scholars, scholars of different disciplines, historical and mental health, military experts, and political pundits. The scholars, we did not interview them on their political leanings. Many will assume that they are left-leaning or a left-leaning population. That's fair enough. As far as the military experts and the political pundits, we only interviewed Republicans and conservatives or right-leaning people. In fact, most of them voted for Trump. Mm-hmm. And this was very important, that it not just be a message coming from partisan left who are seeming to, will find anything they can wrong with Trump, which is a chart. And in the case Anthony Scaramucci, George Conway, Scott Ritter, all these people voted for Trump, but were a little uncomfortable with it. And as time wore on, they became increasingly uncomfortable, and many of them sought out on their own some research to understand what they saw as a troubled psychology, and found a shape for their thoughts in this scholarship, in this mental health scholarship. So our effort was to inform the general public about this aspect of the discussion without regard for whether that is one-sided or another. What it does is, there's a concept called the Overton window. I don't know if you know this, but basically says that the range of political debate from the two extremes, by definition, the center is the middle of the two extremes. And you have a lot of people, political radicals, particularly on the right, who say very extreme things. Trump, for one, is a genius at manipulating the Overton window. The more extreme a thing that you say, you move the center, right? Mm-hmm. So when Trump says, I want to deport all 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States, and makes that a more of a mainstream thought, he moves the center. And then when he rolls back, he's only going to deport 5 million. That seems like a moderate position. Yeah. I think the left does not generally use this technique, and I personally don't want to use it either, because I don't think it's ever valuable to degrade the political discussion. But a true argument, even if it is seemingly immoderate, this argument is true, even though I think by social pressures of the polite way to talk about mainstream politics, this film is seen as outrageous. But the more true information you can get out there, you're also moving the Overton window. And so as we put this argument out there, and more reasonable mainstream people are picking it up and are equipped with the language for speaking about this problem, the debate is shifting. And we feel this so dramatically because we started this project several years ago at this point, when we thought of the project, and we had to fund it, and then it'd take a year to make the project. And when we were saying these things even a year ago, this was considered absurd. And the number of people who accept it, who are interested in hearing it, who don't laugh this idea off the table at the beginning, has changed dramatically in the past 18 months, no question. The other thing, oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, because I have to getting to a close. Yeah. One more question. Where will this film be shown? In cinemas? And later on, do we have a deal with a television company as well?
The film, well, I don't think there's going to be any theatrical. The film was set for a theatrical run this spring in order to be streaming in the summer, and maybe on subscription services right up to the election. The idea is to circulate it as much as possible. I think in all likelihood, we're going to do some preview. It's running in festivals right now. Mm-hmm. We're going to do some preview screening, maybe limited availability in the United States, maybe in June, with a formal digital release on all platforms in August.
Okay. I wish you all the luck for the film. And what do you think? Who's going to win the next election?
I do not know. It is it is a scary time on that. I don't think anyone knows. I think that the most interesting thing, and I'll make it quick because I know you have to go, but it is that we have to take the election of Trump as not just about Trump. It's about something larger that's going on in the world, and it's happening on all continents around the globe. There is a clear move towards authoritarianism. Mm-hmm. And we know from history that the move towards authoritarianism really happens from the social fabric really being severely disrupted. And I think that's where our focus needs to be, is how we put the fabric of society back together so that people are not drawn to the simple answers of authoritarians who are just telling them they're going to take it back to the good old days.
Thank you very much, Dan Partland, and all the best for you in California.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
Okay, be well.